welcome to I Like Beer, the book club, where we discuss great books while drinking beer. That's it. Beer and a book, couple friends. It's that simple. I'm your host, Jeff Spanier. With me, co-host of the ILB podcast, affectionately nicknamed The Talent, Jeff Riccitelli.
Excited to be here again to discuss another book and have some more beer.
And our book and beer friend, author, Ryan Woldt.
Hey guys, it's good to have you back on this coast, not so far inland.
That's true.
That's right. On the I Like Beer, the podcast, we've been discussing our road trip to Utah. Website has some pictures. Our latest episodes tell the stories, so you can check that out. I like beer, thepodcast.com, and wherever you get your podcast. What have you been up to, Ryan?
I've been avoiding your podcast because I was jealous of your trip and I didn't want to hear about it. It just made me angry. So I've got it saved. I started a new job working with the Escondido Creek Conservancy, and so that's taken up a lot of my brain power. Not because I'm necessarily doing a lot of work yet, but mostly just anytime you start something new, by the end of the day, your brain starts to shut down. And so that's taken up a lot of my capacity. But then at night, I keep on with all the other projects. You know, the coffee podcast, Roast West Coast, is still going. I'm on my 4th or 5th round of edits on the follow-up to my book, Eli and Jane. Started another new show. And I think I watched all of Brooklyn Nine-Nine on Hulu. So it's been a lot of projects and no sleep.
So you've been busy.
Yeah. Not all of us can just go out and drink beer and camp and, you know.
That's true. That is true.
Well, the life of a teacher. I think we have been told more than once that this COVID school year, we are on a permanent, eternal summer vacation. I think that has been said by community members and leaders
many times.
I was going to say by community members, but I don't know many teachers that have felt that way.
No teachers are saying that.
No, it was a much needed break, much enjoyed.
Yeah.
And we also enjoyed sharing the story with our listeners. So,
you know, I forgot. I did do one other thing since I've seen you last, which is I started this fitness app on my phone called 30 Days to Six Pack Abs.
Nice.
And I can't, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I might have a lawsuit on my hands because it was false marketing, because I just crossed the 30-day mark and we're no closer than we were at the beginning.
Oh,
they might say, no, you know what? You got a keg. You asked for a 6-pack, you got a keg. What are you complaining about?
Well, that's the problem, is I'm so thirsty afterwards.
that's true. Hydration is important.
Hey, we got a show to do here.
That's right.
Yep.
Jeff and I bonded years ago over our fondness for craft beer and telling stories. In fact, we spent a lot of our time drinking beer and talking about books. Thought we were the only ones till we met Ryan and learned there was at least one more kindred soul. And apparently we all three love to hear ourselves talk based on the number of podcasts we're involved in. So once a month, we join our intellectual powers to discuss a book and share a beer, rotating the host based on who has chosen the book. And tonight, even though he forgot, it's Ryan's turn. And the book is The Cactus League by Emily Nemens.
Yes, and we chose this book, I'm remembering now, because it was spring and we were all excited about baseball. I'm a big baseball fan. Last year, I went to my very first spring training for the Milwaukee Brewers, which is my home team. And I was all excited to read about baseball. And so when this book popped up, it seemed like the perfect choice at that time at the end of March, beginning April there.
You're a writer and I'm a reader. So I think I identified italics around that word seemed. And before we get to that comment, what are we drinking? What are you drinking, Ryan?
So I don't want to give away too much about how I feel about the book, but I did choose my first drink based on how I feel about the book. So I grabbed this canned vodka soda thing from a local brewery that is branching out. I don't even want to name the brewery because I'm going to say that the drink is a lot like the book without a lot of substance. 0 sugar, gluten-free, but I just couldn't do it. So I switched over. I've got a Deschutes Squeezy Rider West Coast IPA.
Nice.
That's
choice.
what I'm drinking.
Good call.
Talent, what are you drinking?
I have gone to my go-to baseball beer, which is the AleSmith Hazy 394. And I'm I mean, it's a collaboration, obviously, with Tony Gwynn, and it's a great beer. And I'm actually really enjoying the hazy form of it. I think I had one last year where whenever they first came out with it, and I haven't had it since. And so I think my palate has changed a lot, where I'm starting to enjoy hazies a lot more. That's a result of hanging out with the doctor too much. But
Right.
I'm
Can't
actually
hang
really,
out with the doctor too much.
yeah, it's true. But I'm really enjoying the hazy now. I can see my palate has changed a little bit there.
The
Does
train
it taste
slowed
like
down.
the 390? Does it taste like the regular 394 with just like a haze to it, or?
I think it's got a little more of the kind of that citrus to it, than the regular one. I mean, the regular one to me is such a perfect, pale ale beer. So this it's good. It's like I said, it's very good, very clean. It just got a little more citrus in it.
And how about you, Jeff?
Well, on our trip through Arizona, since our book takes place in Arizona, we stopped by. Well, there's a whole story about Colorado City on the podcast. I won't get into it, but it's an interesting place with an interesting story or two. But we found Helton Brewing, who we have interviewed, Brian Helton. He's been on our show, and we just fell in love with his Pilsner. So I grabbed 8 of those. I have 2 left. They'll probably be gone by the end of the show.
Nice.
But also kind of fitting. I did try to fit it thematically. So I've got an Arizona beer, and it's called Valley Venom.
Nice. That is appropriate.
And it's got this. We'll be talking about some snake bit characters, I think. So it's got the rattler striking out at you right on the can. So that's what I've got here. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone. It's good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Good to be seen.
So we should probably get into talking about the
Let's
book.
talk about
I think
this
we're
book.
like 10 minutes into the show.
We're all
already.
avoiding the book.
There's no more avoiding it. Let's go. That's a ringing endorsement already.
Yes.
So here's the thing about this book before we get too far is that it has a ton of great reviews. LA Times, New York Times, all over the place. Every time you read a review, it is about how this book encompasses summer, spring baseball. So that was part of the reason I was motivated to get and excited about reading the book.
Best book of 2020 NPR.
Yeah, NPR. Come on, man. I don't know this author, obviously, and I don't like speaking bad about another author. And I don't think that this is a bad book either. But it was not as advertised about baseball. This is a soap opera.
Right.
This is what my grandfather watches between 10 a.m. and noon every single day for the last 75 years. About Jason Goodyear, I initially thought the story would follow kind of one or two main characters. And right away from the beginning, the very first chapter has nothing to do with our star outfielder, Jason Goodyear of the Los Angeles Lions, who was actually very well written because I could easily imagine him as kind of a petulant Dodger.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman, Tammy, who is kind of the other protagonist. But the book actually starts out with an older couple, an older coach who is going back to spring training and visiting his house, and he finds his house has been robbed. And I'm wondering from you guys, I kind of related, I think, most with this older coach. I felt a little robbed. I'm wondering how you guys felt. I'm wondering if the book, it sounds like none of us really were as enthused about it as maybe NPR was. But I'm wondering if the book that you read matched the description of the book that we had at the beginning. And if it would have made a difference to you if it had been presented differently.
I think potentially it was. I mean, I honestly didn't read much in terms of like the back page of it or the, to try and kind of find out a little overview. I just saw the Cactus League. It's got a picture of a baseball in the front. And I thought, hey, we're going to read it. This is going to be a good baseball story. And as you have already stated, I mean, while they talked well about baseball and described baseball well, it was such a minor part of the story that I think that's where the disappointment came from. I also, I started reading it, and as it first came out, I'm like, oh, this is going to be like a Bull Durham type of thing with the Tammy character and everything else. I'm like, I could get into this, because I really enjoyed that movie, but they wove the baseball into it as well. And baseball was always kind of just sitting way out there. It never became a character within the, a part of the story. So I think that was a little bit, that was a part for me that was maybe lacking. I also I was expecting, as you start to get into a character, and then they would just drop the character, right? And they would, like, it was almost like it was a series of short stories as opposed to, and then maybe they would pick them up 3 stories down the road a little bit, but there was no sequencing, like it was just they didn't fit together to me. And there was a couple towards the end where they started to come together a little bit, but I didn't, I was looking for a story, like I said, a story about a team, a story about players, and you follow them through the spring training and whatever, good, bad, indifferent in terms of that, but you see the effects on the ups and downs. So I think that was part of it. And then the other part, and maybe this is getting too far ahead of us in terms of questions, it just was depressing. Like, where was the positive? And I've grown up as a baseball fan and idolized baseball players and the whole life of how great would it be to be a professional baseball player. And I read this and I'm like, is it really like this? Because no one is happy. Each
character is more miserable
than the other ones. Yeah. And if that's how it really is, I'm like, wow, that's the worst job in the world, is to be a professional baseball player.
Or have any association.
Yeah, or
baseball.
Be a coach, or be a wife, or be, whatever it is, So that was where like I said, for me, I was just waiting for where's the turnaround on this? Where's the positivity on, what's going to happen? And it just never happened.
Or in Jurassic Park, where Ian Malcolm's, taps on the glass and says, "Are there any dinosaurs on this tour?" That's how I was feeling. Is there any baseball in this baseball book? I so desperately wanted this to be Bull Durham meets The Natural, because I did read, I had read some reviews, just enough. I didn't want any spoilers, but just enough to say, this is The Natural, but it's in spring training. So we're going to have this great paradox of spring, of hope springs eternal, of a new beginning. What a great way to create a tragedy, because there was enough revealed that it was not going to be pleasant for this guy. And it wasn't. I would even say they weren't short stories. They were character sketches. Short stories would have each had their own little plot, but they didn't. We sketch out a character, and we're sketching out a new character. We're sketching out another character. And once in a while, the lines cross. And Ryan, I was wondering what you were thinking, because I know how many drafts you did in Eli and Jane, which started off to some degree, if I remember correctly, sketching out character. Mm-hmm. But what you did so well, and what always brings me back, even when we were going by different rest stops and through the desert, I think of, that looks like the one Jane ran off on. I would think that what has brought me back to that story is that it was, of course, plot driven. It's a character based book, but had a plot that drove it. And this one felt like it was more character sketch, not plot, even though at the very beginning, I think even page 1, they talk about baseball's linear. A story is linear. And then it decides it's not.
Yes, it is. They mention that, and then they almost address it like 9 innings. So the way she has her sketches organized by 9 innings. And I think where I struggled was something you guys have been getting at. We've certainly had stories, or even in this book club, we've read books like The Overstory by Richard Powers that follows a bunch of different characters. That one on a much grander, scale, but it can work, and it can be very effective. But with this one, there didn't seem to be a transition from one character sketch into the next. Yes, they overlap, kind of in the same way that 2 people who live in the same town might be in the same grocery store at the same time, but they don't necessarily know their stories are overlapping, and us as the reader don't really see where those characters are overlapping. For anyone that has listened to the show, sometimes we have trains and sirens and stuff, so that's always
authentic.
fun.
Authentic.
Very authentic. I'm just going to wait 1 second for that to go by. But I actually wrote a note to myself. I think I can't remember exactly. Oh no, here it is, page 41 at the bottom. It's the end of a chapter. It's a chapter called Second. I'm assuming implying second inning. and I wrote, who is this? Who's talking here?
Yeah.
Who's narrating this section? It's only like 2 or 3 pages, and it's kind of like this high level philosophical look down on our character Tammy, and some of the other characters we've been introduced to, but I had no idea who was talking. And I even wrote, is this a reporter? Is this something, a foreshadowing type of thing? And I almost wondered if it would work better on television, where it was some sort of narrator, like Alec Baldwin in a Wes Anderson movie, or just something to get us along.
It's funny you bring that up, because I actually thought the same thing on each time where that narrator would come in at the beginning of each inning or chapter. And I'm truly trying to figure out, like, who is this the author talking or whatever it is? And it wasn't until after we finished and I went and I did read a review and they talked about that it's a sports writer that was following the team. And I'm like,
kind of washed up.
Yeah. But I never realized that really throughout the entire book. And I, that's interesting that you just brought that up, because I just kind of felt like, well, that was very and you talked about the overlaps. I think the word that I would use, they were superficial, right? There was no substance to that connection on how this person's story connects with this story. It was very, we bumped into each other and then we went and did something else. They didn't affect the next person's story at all. So,
and our sports writer does not write like a journalist.
No.
No, in Sun Also Rises, Jake reports out the story at some cost to emotional connection to it, or at least feigning that he has no emotional connection to it. This guy's gossipy. He's nosy. He wants to talk about shark teeth in the desert, but then all of a sudden how that connects to a homeless family that's squatting in a house, and it becomes very contrived, the narrator. I think I do know it's hard to write badly, and if the sports writer is supposed to be washed up and writing like a washed up sports writer, that's hard to do from a writing stance, to write like someone who's an older man washed up. But it wasn't compelling.
No, like I'll go to the one, like I'm looking at her again, because this was the one that just jumped out at me, is right at the start of the 8th chapter, the 8th inning. And all of a sudden he starts talking about the Hohokam Native Americans. And I'm like, where did that come from? And then he's talking about it, and then it's like, and then they gave it away to the Pima people. And I'm like, wait, where is this coming from? All of this Native American part of it. It didn't have, like, at no point anywhere else in the story did they talk about this. And so I agree with you that flow was just not there.
He calls it at the beginning. He has to give us he calls it, quote, the long game.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to tell you the long game to get to the essence of this, the root of Jason Goodyear's situation. But there wasn't a connection between,
right.
They're just, funny enough, there wasn't a connection between the receding oceans of 160 million years ago and Jason Goodyear's problems in a casino.
True.
Yes. And that's something we should talk about, since obviously we never want to give too much away, but if anyone's listening to this and actually respects our opinions, they're probably not going to read this book.
Not running out to read this book.
Jason Goodyear is a baseball player he's like the Mike Trout of the league. He's the best player. He's got all the tools. Seemingly his life is perfect on the outside, but on the inside, what we see is that he's going through a divorce because he has a gambling problem. There is a casino near his spring training in Arizona, and that's causing him temptation problems. And near the end of the book, he has one moment where I think the author was trying to give him a chance at redemption, where he sees a child sleeping in a hot car. But I wouldn't necessarily say I came away thinking he was redeemed for all of these terrible things he did, because he had the foresense to break a window.
And
it's not heroic to save a dying child in a hot car. It's human.
Yeah.
They didn't need Jason Goodyear to walk by. They needed any human being to walk by.
When I feel like that was how they tied two stories together. That was, like I said, it wasn't, I mean, I guess it was their glimpse at redemption. But I will say this: to say that Jason Goodyear has a gambling problem is the understatement of the word.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
he's not playing online poker occasionally. He's leaving games in the middle of innings to run to the casino and back before the next out.
I believe, I don't have the exact, but I believe they said at one point he signed a $150 million contract, and he's at the point right now where he's living in a shed because he has given everything away to the people, and they're still coming after him for more money. So he has a problem.
And he's one of the more likable characters we meet. Every character, like I said, each one's more flawed than the other, and they're not balanced with redemption or virtue or hope or joy.
Right.
And I as I'm thinking about it, I think that unbalanced, it either seems forced or it drags down the plot, because I think it's in our nature as readers, as storytellers and story listeners, to see arcs, character arcs or ups and downs or something. Give me something.
Or even
I don't mind if mighty Casey strikes out, but you got to make him mighty at some point.
Well, I was going to say, even to have sometimes characters that balance each other out, right? Where you have this character that's on a downward trajectory and you have another character that's maybe on an upward. And so that gives the reader some hope. It's like this one is, hey, this guy's a degenerate gambler. This guy's addicted to Vicodin and he's waiting just for his arm to be gone. It's like down to, and that's just, just this downward slope from there. And that's why I said, it's like, you'd think someone that writes this, obviously she has either done research or has spent time around the game. She knows enough about it. The writing is there about baseball. And so I'm wondering too, with these characters, is there has to be some basis in reality there as well, which again is kind of sad, because that means that, she's either come across someone that's in these circumstances or has read about them. And again, I try to think of, at what point any of them have a redeeming quality. I mean, even to the boy you talked about that is locked up in the car, it's because the mom, who was working at the stadium, decides to take off on a bender, and just tell her kid to go sit out in the Phoenix or the Scottsdale sun in the car and wait for her, and I mean, it's like I said, it's just different levels of
the one character that seems like at the beginning, Coach Taylor that Ryan was talking about, who has this sort of what would Joe DiMaggio do mantra. I'm like, okay, he's going to be our moral compass. Even if it's Joe DiMaggio's moral compass, at least it's a moral compass. But no, he's gone out of the book after page 38.
They abandoned him. I mean, like nothing came back out of him at any point. He basically disappeared.
And the only other character was this teenage girl who's in it for a little bit, who seems like the only one with her head screwed on straight, who has an ambition and desire to improve. And the author goes, or I should say the narrator. That's bad English teacher to assume it's the author. But the narrator goes out of his way multiple times to talk about how heavy she is and unattractive she is. It's like, she's the only decent person in the book. Will you leave her alone?
Well, we should talk about this character Tammy, and Tammy is what I think in the Bull Durham era would have been called a bleacher bunny. She's somebody who is looking for a player to be their girlfriend for a spring training or a season, or possibly end up getting married someday. But she's a little bit older now, and she's been around the team. She loves baseball. She grew up. She was dating a baseball player who made it big at one point, or they thought would make it big and got injured. But she her love of the game is real. But she's kind of taken this other path adjacent to the game, almost in an effort to stay close to it. And there's relatively early on in the book, she's kind of referring to herself in that way. She says, the narrator says, she's still beautiful and not in that magnanimous way. But even as she convinces herself of this, in the mirror, she can see how her ass has begun to sag, how her breasts swing low. She twists one towel around her blonde hair, wraps another across her chest. She knows this much. There's no more surprise herself beauty. And she's referring to that moment where she would walk past a mirror and be like, whoa, who is that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I can certainly understand some of that, where you get to a certain point in your life where you realize maybe your best physical days are behind you. And
You might need 60 days for those abs.
I might need 60. And I wrote a note that don't you wish you knew that you were in your best years when you were in them? And I meant that not just, I meant that both physically, I wish I could have appreciated that when I was younger a little bit, or an athlete or playing sports, but also kind of in the moment, the knowing you're in the best years of your life, whether it's emotionally or mentally or in your growth. If you knew it in the moment, would you change things or could you? And that was a nice kind of thought process that I went on because of that particular description.
And that's an example of where Miss Nemens or Mrs. Nemens, I'm not sure which it is a stellar writer. Yeah. I mean, she has all the accolades to back it up. If this particular storytelling doesn't work for us, it's not from lack of writing skill in the moment. Like in the moment of a character description, even though there was no plot, I did get kind of invested in each character and annoyed when it switched, which means, I was compelled to read. She does have the nuance of phrase, some moments of expressing humanity, the human condition. I go, okay. And I marked some of those too, that like right there, do that all the time. If you can do that, don't stop doing it.
Did that make you, because of those moments where you're invested and then maybe frustrated and then invested and maybe frustrated again, did that make you race through this book?
Yes.
Or did it take longer because you were trying to get something out of it or find that thing out of it? You're saying yes.
I wanted it over. I was like, this isn't going to go well. I can see this isn't going to go well. All I want to know are the plots, the bits and pieces of character sketches that seem to almost start a plot. Are they going to come together? That's all I want to know. Are they going to come together and how? And I kind of thought she was, and this would be for a debut novel, this would be a big chunk to bite off, but I thought she was almost trying to play with like the formula for a comedy where you have multiple subplots going on, many characters and many subplots, and then they weave together at the end like a great Seinfeld episode, like a Shakespearean comedy. But doing that in a tragedy, I'm like, that's new. Does she? I'm not particularly interested, but I do want to know, does she do it? And not in a way that satisfied me as a reader. At the end, I mean, there were some pieces that came together, but it wasn't. And maybe she wanted it to be that. This is no way redeeming. So I'm not going to give the character that satisfaction. But I did race to directly answer your question.
Yeah. How about you, Jeff?
So I would say, I mean, to kind of piggyback on some of your points, I do think, she is a good writer. I think it's a well-written book. It's very easy to read. It's easy to follow. I think I found with, so you could plow through it, but I found actually that myself stopping a lot, I think out of the frustration though, of like, I'm going to put this down for a few minutes, or whatever, just because, wait, why did this not happen? And you're trying to make these predictions or projections, or you're seeing things happen. And so it took me longer than I could have read it much faster, but I felt myself kind of reading it in the chunks and just putting it down for a while. Cause it's like, okay, I'm frustrated right now. Oh, now I'll go back to it again and continue reading it. And I really feel like for me, the two things where I was expecting a little more baseball, and I didn't see the connections between the characters, and that's what so in some ways you'd finish a character and you're like, well, I'm just going to put this down for a while because I don't feel like starting a whole new storyline, at this point.
Yeah, I definitely raced through it because I thought, well, there's another book. I'm reading this because of book club.
Right.
If I wasn't reading it for book club, the I Like Beer book club,
that's right,
I might not have finished it. It would have gone into a pile where, I've said, you know what, this just isn't worth me going any further because I feel pretty confident in that, in that thing. What I think maybe we're all agreeing that it wasn't the right book for us.
Right.
What I would ask is what could have made this more enjoyable? And one thing I kept seeing throughout the whole thing is, okay, if the baseball isn't the thing, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
What I was hoping, I think, from the beginning was that this Jason Goodyear character who's down on his luck and has the gambling problem and his whole facade of his career is crumbling. He's in a bad place. and our character Tammy is kind of also in a bad place where she's essentially squatting in a house of an ex, and power's getting turned off, and she's lost her job, and all these other things. And they reference an interaction that Tammy and Jason had at one point, and I thought, oh, okay, that's the story. Those two are somehow going to come together, and even in their mutual misery or their mutual whatever, they're somehow going to lift each other up. And that would have been really compelling for me to continue with. But instead, they just kind of kept seeing each other in the distance of their characters and
Right.
never actually, had that opportunity to come together.
There's
Because,
even a touch on the shoulder and into the book, and it make a point of it was a 2-finger touch on the shoulder, like, oh, that's what I waited for from the beginning, for her to tap him on the shoulder and say, "Attaboy."
Yeah, I don't think she said it to him. She might have said it to whoever it was later on, but she even makes a comment like, I'll fix you, or I think, and that's what you were kind of waiting for. That's why I said that's where the Bull Durham part of it, where you go, oh, this is going to be the Annie Savoy character, right? And it never really evolves into that. And even to the point like where Annie Savoy seemed to always kind of be at this higher level of how she operates, where she's in there and they're throwing the rocks, and she decides, well, I'm going to go in and steal all this stuff out of the store at the same point. I even went beyond that, because I saw that, like, well, that's the predictable story. And then I thought what was going to happen, again, for me, just making predictions, or what I would have liked to have seen happen, was, you had the old crusty agent guy, right? So he hires the girl Sarah away from the company, and here she's the young, smart, that, and I'm like, well, there's the connection. Maybe she's going to connect with Jason and be his savior. Here's a woman that's has nothing to do with the baseball or all that, and you just kept waiting for that. And I think that's for me, whatever that plot line would have been, or whoever that was, you needed something where you were going to start to see that pathway to redemption.
I would have even been, to Ryan's point and your point, I would have even been satisfied if Tammy, or that other character, what's her name? Is it Amy? If they had a crash, I mean, if Jason Goodyear and we're set up to think, here's your redemption, here's where you heal, here's where you face your dragon, face your demons, and if it had failed and they all miserably crash, that would have worked for me too.
Yeah,
because it would have completed what I felt, a journey that started, and it would have said, no, these people are beyond redemption. Tammy is not the goddess fixer that she thinks she is. Jason Goodyear can't just be Mr. All-American and smile his way through it. No, they self-destruct or destruct together. That would have worked for me.
Yeah, I actually really like the character you're referring to, the woman who takes the job with the sports agent. Her name is Sarah.
Sarah, yes.
And the sports agent's name is Herb, or Herb, and it is 4:20. We're recording this, so I figured that's appropriate. He was really entertaining. He kind of reminded me of Tom Cruise's character in Tropic Thunder. He's just cranky, aggressive, in your face, clearly obnoxious guy. But he kind of seems like he's the guy who could have had a heart of gold, who could have been the redeeming character, because he doesn't. When he hired Sarah, my first thought was, oh God, this is going to end terribly for Sarah.
Right.
But it doesn't. He uplifts her. He gives her an opportunity. But Sarah kind of chooses to keep herself at a middling level, because she just didn't have any other examples of improving. And she is confronted by a wife who, like us, thinks something is happening when it's not. And I thought that would have been entertaining as well. And I wonder, as a reflection on us, as I'm going to try and turn this around and come up with something a little more redemptive, since that's what we're all hoping for, it is springtime. There is this facade that athletes have that we don't always get to break through. That's every fan's hope, is that they're going to break through the facade and see the real person. But there is this, as a culture, we've kind of transitioned into this aspect of where we really want to see the facade break. I'm not saying I want to see that. I'm above all that.
Oh, yes. Way above.
Right. But the TMZ kind of attitude, right? Like, we love Matthew McConaughey, but if Matthew McConaughey got caught doing something controversial, we'd love that just as much, right? As a culture. And it kind of feels like Jason Goodyear is a representation of that. And I wrote a little thing to myself saying, what if what if we read tomorrow that Mike Trout had a gambling problem? You know, he seems like the most inoffensive superstar athlete in baseball. So talented and yet so boring that he's never even in the news. Right. If we found out he had a gambling problem, how would we react? And I think this story kind of gives us the buildup to the moment where the world is going to find out, but never lets us go beyond that, never gives us the payoff.
But I feel like it's ground that's so well trodden. We've seen Michael Jordan and how his competitiveness has ruined his humanity. We've seen Tiger Woods fall apart in front of us and try to rebuild and those struggles. You know, we've seen Charles Barkley and his crazy game where we just go, that's my salary, you just gamble. You know, we know about Pete Rose. We grew up knowing about Pete Rose. So it just seemed to me like trodden ground.
Pete Rose feels like I was just thinking of him too, the most accurate description, where he's kind of gone, it's not this story anymore. It's just kind of this pathetic is a word that I want to use. You know, like he was an incredibly talented human being who made a mistake, and he could have just moved on, and we would have always thought of him as the hit king, and some people still do. But he's more known now because of his gambling and because of how defensive he is about not acknowledging that
just
he
not
did
accepting
this thing.
it. Yeah.
And
I think
that's good.
No, go ahead. I think what's interesting that you bring up an interesting point, and it makes me kind of rethink a little bit about the book too, is looking at it through that lens. So again, someone of, say, my, you know, when I grew up, you know, and I guess Jeff would have grown up at that time. I mean, I would read anything about any athlete, and I always put athletes on such a pedestal, right? And that was kind of, I think, what you did at that time, right? They're all larger than life. They're all, and we never really saw behind the curtain, as you said. We never saw all the bad stuff that, you know, and it seems like today now, especially I would say in the era of social media, it's the opposite, right? We're no one can be that good. How do we tear them down? And it feels like this book maybe is written more from that mentality. So maybe that's also something from us, from a generational thing, or just from me in general, is a reason why I had a hard time with the book, because I like to see my athletes being holier than thou and being put on that pedestal. In reality, I know that's not true. You know, that is interesting. I hadn't thought about it looking at it that way. And so this is really written from a, you know, hey, you make a mistake, it's out there. You know, the new, you know, what do you want to call it? The news cycle is, you know, every 10 seconds, 15 seconds, something else is happening. And you look at the people we've had and seen in the last, you know, 10, 15 years that have, you know, you thought had everything, and you realize all of a sudden, hey, they don't have everything. It is kind of interesting if you think about it through that lens.
I've read about this called the Nixon complex, you know, where our presidents, you know, certainly we had many flawed and awful people have done awful things as president in the past, but after Nixon, it's fair game. Right. You know, we turned a blind eye to an awful lot of things, but after Nixon, it was, no, we find it, we exploit it, and we hold them I don't know if we hold them accountable. Rich white people don't get held accountable very often, but we expose it. And
that's very valid. Like think about JFK versus Nixon. I mean,
there you go.
That would be a great example right there.
There's a Senator Gary Hart from Colorado, and he is known. They made a movie about him called The Front Runner.
Monkey Business.
It was kind of the first time a scandal was put on television and spread in newspapers for the world to see. Hugh Jackman played him in the movie, and I remember thinking about how nice it must have been to live in a time before that.
Right.
before, and granted, it's like anything. You know, I'm going through some retirement planning right now. I'm not anywhere close to that, but thinking about it, and the companies and the investments that we put in, part of taking this new job, there was a retirement component. But thinking about, okay, well, these are the companies that are being invested in. Do I want to spend all my time working at this job at an environmental conservancy, and then my retirement money is going to, say, an oil company? Right. You know, thinking about that. And I, I was talking to my in-laws who are retired about advice, and they, and they're very smart and very good with money, but they both kind of said, well, we never had to think about that because we were ignorant to the fact that this was an issue. But, new generations are not. They are aware of all these things. They can't pretend that their politicians are perfect. They can't pretend that their athletes are perfect.
Right.
And what I wish this book would have done, assuming that is a perspective of this author, I'm not sure what generation she is or how old or what perspective she comes at it from, but would have been to show that, but then also kind of, if you're going to go down that rabbit hole, at least give us, I think you guys have referred to this before, but some nugget of showing that it is possible to maintain hope, even when things are negative. And because without that, then it's easy to stop hoping. It's easy to stop, not every athlete has to be perfect, and not even one athlete has to be perfect, but some should be at least kind of good,
Right, exactly.
as people, not just as athletes.
It's that balance, right? If we're going to make them human, then they can't be all flaw.
Yeah.
It is human to be flawed, of course, but it also is human to have some redeeming qualities, and those didn't come out
at all. Yeah.
I mean, even at the end when Jason Goodyear is taking the rookie that's just been cut under his wing, and you're like, all right, he's gonna say things will be all right, little buddy. Yeah, you're gonna be fine. Do your time in the minor league. No, he's just hitting them up for a $500,000.
Can I have some money?
Yeah. Like, huh. Yeah, I thought there you were just gonna give him a pat on the back and say you're gonna be all right. Stay out of the casinos.
Yeah, do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
I feel almost terrible that we're being hypocritical because we are saying mean things about this book, but we're also saying that the author is a very clearly talented writer from a character perspective. And you said something, you were talking about that earlier, and now as I'm thinking about it further and looking back on some of the pages of this book, I almost wonder if it would have worked better as a collection of short stories where spring training was the setting, but baseball wasn't necessarily the theme. And then each character had a beginning and an end. And where this struggle, where I really struggled with this, is that so many characters just had a beginning, but they almost didn't have a middle or an end. Only very few characters did. And while I like endings that are ambivalent or ambiguous, I'm not sure if I'm using that term right.
They can be both those things.
Yeah.
But they are two different things.
Yes. Where I like an ending that is kind of middle of the road, where you don't get all of the answers, I still like there to be an ending of sorts. And this felt like it was just kind of written as the beginning, and there still needs to be kind of that middle and ending to it.
The writing teacher in me says you're 4 or 5 drafts away. Now, the part of
You're
my
a writing
brain,
teacher?
Yeah, yes. As you've noted, you don't care for my notes.
No, I'm just kidding.
But
I haven't sent you any new drafts, but
yes,
I plan to.
I'm so sorry. I'm nothing if not honest. But the rational part of my brain is, it was LA Times bestseller. It was a New York Times book review editor's choice, and it was book of the year by 2020 NPR. So what the hell do I know? And if you like a soap opera and you want character sketches, this is going to be your glass of beer or your cup of tea.
Yeah, I think if they wouldn't have centered the book description and the cover art so much around baseball, I might have had a totally different experience. I can't say that I truly believe that, but I think at least part of me would have been less engaged with that part of it. And but I still do think that maybe a collection of short stories or some sort of transition between characters. I think that when you're talking about being a draft or two away, that sports writer character, that would be the part that gets cut and replaced with some sort of transitional flow, because it got so philosophical and so higher level that it just didn't relate. It took you totally out of the rest of the stories.
Oh dear. She really does want to let you know that she took a modern architecture class at one point, doesn't she?
Yeah, that came in out again. That's a whole other part of it that we already talked about.
Every once in a while, like every 17th page, it was, I'm going to now give you one paragraph on Frank Lloyd Wright.
I do know what it's I do, as someone who does write. I will write about things that I don't necessarily know about that I research. We read just in our last book that we read together, The Logger Queen of Minnesota. At the end, he kind of refers to the fact that he did all this research and wasn't necessarily involved in some of these worlds before writing about them. And I don't think that's necessary. But I definitely do know that there is an imposter syndrome to writing about something you haven't personally experienced. And sometimes you can go too far.
Yes.
With that, and even when I have a character who is not my gender, not my sexuality, I worry about that. And so I do I get a lot of feedback from people who fall into those categories and say, does this feel real to you? Does this seem authentic to the tone of voice? And I wonder how many people gave that kind of feedback in this book.
I know in my own writing, I did work on 2 or 3 drafts of a book about being a mule crossing the border with illicit drugs. And I realized I've read a lot of books on this, but I don't have any experience. So Paul, formerly the shower beer guy, and I went down to Tijuana and just kept crossing the border over and over again, each time with a larger backpack. And we didn't want to get in too much trouble. We just wanted to know what it was like to get pulled aside, got put in office. So we had fireworks. We kept taking things we weren't supposed to take. Nothing that was going to get us in too big a trouble. 2 white guys, nothing. All day long for 2 days, they let cross the border, 5 or 6 times a day, more and more drunk each time, and trying to get that experience so I could put it in the book. And then the movie Traffic came out, and I said, "Yep, that's what I was writing. Thanks. We're done." That's it, and better.
Well, I hope you wrote them. I hope you wrote the producers a note and at least asked for some sort of credit.
They had never seen what I was working on, but it was awful close. And I'm like, wow.
Well,
that's what I'm working on.
Maybe they got the story from one of the Border Patrol guys who's like,
true.
these 2 idiots
have been coming back
crossing the border with backpacks. I don't know what the deal is. I feel like that's a good place to kind of to slow this down and come to the end. I'm referring right now to the Oprah Daily, who's got a whole list of general book club questions. Is there any lingering question from this book that we're still thinking about, that we worry about, or that we care enough about to ask?
Wondering, yes. Care enough, no. I mean, it's left you with, can Jason Goodyear, we already alluded to, they smashes his hand breaking a window to save a child. He's going to go to the hospital. His ex-wife's on her way. The agent's going to figure some things out. Sarah could spill the beans. I don't really care. Yeah. But it is left in a moment where it seems like, well, his world could crash on him, and then he could make some headlines as a hero for saving a child. He should save the child. That's like I've already said, but I don't really care.
But at the same point, you could say, are we going to find out, is William Gosling going to make it out of the minors? Is the stadium organist, is he going to get replaced by a computer?
We forgot about the organist. We get a whole 30 pages on the organist.
Is the family that has been squatting all over the place, are they going to finally find a home? I mean, there's so many plot lines that are just sitting out there, and that's that. So yeah, you could wonder about all of them.
And I don't.
Yeah.
I wonder about Jane and Eli. I really do. I would just avoid the topic if it wasn't true.
I'm looking forward to that.
I appreciate that. What I'll tell you, here's what I'm gonna do 2 things. One, I want to end this on a positive note. Yep. So if you had to pick your favorite character from the book, who is it and why? And second, I'll print off some copies of the new draft, and I will deliver them with a beer sometime this week of my book. And then if Emily Nemens listens to this and she wants to collaborate on a book with me, I would love to, because you've sold so many more books than I have. I promise you. And we are just people talking on the internet.
That's true.
The new outfielder, the splashy guy, the kid. I was a little scared that the owner is doing a little bit. What do they call that when a sexual predator primes a victim? There's a word for that. It's a gross, disgusting thing.
He grooms them.
Grooms. I was a little worried that that's where we were going with that story, but he seems to be way too interested in girls to fall into that trap. But I liked him. He hardly had a story at all. He's a flashy young guy. He loves baseball. He just wants to go out and show off. And they stopped the story at that. There you got that one.
That's a good one. You stole that one.
Oh,
no, it's good. It's good. It's good. I agree with you. You know what? I guess I would say probably, you know, I think it would be very interesting. The Gosselin kid, you know, the young kid who came in with all the accolades and decides to forego signing at a university because he got the $2 million signing bonuses, and then comes in and kind of realizes, oh wait, I'm a little over my head here. I wonder how true that is, how many kids that happens to every year. You know, as they come into the major leagues, you know, you come from nothing and all of a sudden you're given a ton of money, but now you're set on your own in a stadium. And I thought it was really interesting how, you know, he walks in, he's a 18-year-old, you know, boy, really, and you're in with men, and they aren't forgiving. You know, he had the one guy that's basically heckling him constantly and that kind of stuff, and how tough that must be. It would be interesting to just kind of see that progression and how things go, you know, because you do feel for that character.
Of course, he's already on his way to being an alcoholic.
Yes, well, then and you know what? I think unfortunately that's you compensate, right? You find ways to deal with that. You know, he's on his own. His mom's overbearing. She's constantly calling him. He's avoiding the calls, and you know, and he's got just enough fame that he can go down to the bar and they'll give him whatever he wants, you know, and that kind of stuff. And so it's like it's again a kind of a recipe for disaster. It's a bit sad, but you'd hope again that at some point he meets some good people and they help steer him in the right way, and he ends up having success and everything.
And he's
else.
18 and it's spring, so we can have hope about that character.
There you
still.
Go.
What about you, Ryan?
Well, my favorite character was Herb. I mean, and I think it might just be because I'm imagining Tom Cruise playing him.
Yeah,
in the
that was
movie.
a good call.
That is a great call.
But I wanted to relay a quick story since you brought up Gosselin, which is a close friend of mine growing up in high school, was a baseball player and a very talented one, scouted by the pros. You know, potentially was going to get drafted. And I remember the winter right after high school or senior year of high school, he needed someone to play catch with just to keep his arm warm over Christmas break. And I remember going in, I had keys to the high school gym because I was a basketball player, basketball coach. And we went into the gym and we just started playing, you know, pitch and catch, just soft toss. And we kept backing up. And we got to a point where we're about two basketball courts apart. And I'm bouncing the ball there, you know, kind of on a roll.
Right.
And he's not even trying. And he's throwing it so hard that it's snapping into my glove and my hand is swelling up. He had that kind of strength as a pitcher, and he was at the time. This is in the late '90s, and he was throwing in the '90s, and he never even got drafted. He ended up playing in some low level minor league style baseball. But the difference between the talent at the major league level and that next level is so great and so difficult, and you don't even think about the social component of it, which you just brought up, which I never really thought about. I mean, it's got to be difficult to be a talented athlete who gets to the show at 18 years old or 19 years old or even 20, 21, 22, but you're playing with adults. And even if you are more talented, you know, they might be more ruthless. They've been around the block. They might treat you in a different way because of your youth, you know. Right. It's a really interesting, I think that you're right. That would be a really interesting book to see that side of it.
That transition from a game to a business, right? For him, it's still, as 18, it's still a game. He goes into this locker room, and for them, it's business, right? And so, you know, that I like I said, I think that's fascinating. And I mean, we've seen so many great talents come through our school on the baseball side of it. That have been drafted right out of high school, and we've seen others that, you know, went to college and have done that route and all that kind of stuff. And it's fascinating. It's because we put so much, you know, right or wrong, emphasis on sports in this country, and so much money. You know, so think about that. An 18-year-old that can throw a ball really, you know, hard or whatever else, runs really fast. You give them $2 million versus the kid that's brilliant and, you know, can cure cancer, that kid, there's a long road to get to that point where you can do that. And so
he gets $250,000 in debt
because he wants to go to
Yeah.
college to, save the world. Like I said, that's a whole philosophical question, but it is just an interesting, it would be very interesting to see someone kind of take, I'm sure there are books that do already deal with that or you kind of chart that path, but it is a fascinating, and that's just baseball. I mean, you can go to any sport and kind of follow that along and see how that plays out.
and couple that with how for the ones that have that killer instinct, that competitive drive, men and women, how do you tame that dragon to have a successful marriage, social life, be a good mother, good father, right? There's all that.
Well, that's the
Those
Jason
books are
Goodyear,
out there to
that's
be
the
written.
Jason Goodyear character right there.
Ryan, are you
right?
taking
So,
notes? We get so many ideas for you. Book
I'm
after
taking
book after
notes.
book.
I want to leave this on such a positive note because I know we're closing up. I just wanted to let you know things did work out for my friend. He now works for a very large beer delivery company, and they
yes.
give him as much free beer as he wants.
Living the dream.
Exactly. Yes.
We want to meet him.
Yes.
We want to tell his story. Hey, Ryan, thank you for your choice of book. One thing I do love about having our book club is I read books that are out of my comfort zone, out of my style I'd usually pick up. Definitely enjoyed the conversation. Next up, a classic reread, Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about it and seeing whether the book holds up to a reread. Until
That's a
then,
famous book, right?
it is a famous book.
Pretty sure I've heard of it.
Heard of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're going to enjoy it, but wait, but I know if you don't, you'll let me know. and Mr. Steinbeck's not around, so if you don't, he'll never know. Until then,
Cheers.
cheers.
Cheers.